that it will be very painful if the partner dies, and that's how their relationship works, and also the kind of relationship they have even after the partner has deceased. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Mr. Leung, Kwok-hung, calm down. He talked about love between members of the same sex. I'm not suggesting that there is no love between members of the same sex. I've never said that. But I think that we're here to discuss legal issues and social values. At one time, homosexuality was against the law. But nowadays, we have so much liberty regarding homosexuality. When it comes to the marriage institution and the definition of spouse under this institution, or even the definition of relative, we cannot include all kinds of love in this world. And one kind of love that is not included is love between homosexuals. But it's not just that. There could be loving relationships between relationships that are barred from being included in a marriage institution. So I want to point out that we should not mix things up. I think Mr. Leung Kwok-hung was confused. He was trying to convince everybody and lobby your support for his views on homosexuality. But it has to do with your values, your religion. I think that there is no end to this discussion. And at the end of the day, we may not be able to influence each other's thoughts. So I don't think we should mislead the public.
同性傾向嘅朋友唔係咁嘅問題。
We're not trying to oppress homosexuals. In every jurisdiction, they have their own marriage institution. What the crux of the matter is whether we should just follow the practice of another jurisdiction. If we say that we should do away with our system, and that's something else, we need to have extensive consultation. But then we're not discussing this issue, and I don't think we should pass offensive remarks on people who hold different views on homosexuality. I know most of them, and I know that they're not trying to exclude homosexuals. They just want to maintain the marriage laws and the institution. So the marriage institution comes with restrictions. There may be people asking why their kind of love is not included. It's not regarded as marriage. There could be many kinds of such relationships. So when it comes to the private Columbaria bill, which we're discussing today, I think we understand it very well, and I myself have been following up on this issue since 2008. Of course, I want this bill to be passed as soon as possible. We're in May this year already, and we are discussing the same bill again, and I have some strong feelings. Last term, because of filibustering on the medical registration bill, we did not have the chance to debate on this bill. But anyway, we need to debate on this bill and the issues. And I hope that you would understand that, like Mr. Ray Chen said, regarding this bill, he also considers it a step forward. Is it an easy step? We tried hard to reach consensus. Well, for those who are against same-sex marriage, do they really support adding this category of related persons, they may think that if you take this step, you will take another step. But I agree at the same time that in Hong Kong laws, very often the terms spouse or related or relative would be mentioned. And I think on this occasion, we can deal with this really thorny issue with the new term related persons. So we've come with good intention, and today I hold the same view. When it comes to claiming the ashes of the deceased partner, well, I don't know. Perhaps a few of them could be claiming the ashes for some evil purpose, but otherwise, the majority of the claimants would do so out of good intention. And we have the same concept in the Fatal Accidents Ordinance. And the concept is that for a related person, he should be somebody who has lived with the deceased for 2 years. Mr. Ray Chan asked whether the period of living together can be shortened to 1 year. I think it's a matter of consistency in the law. There should be consistency in our law on how we define spouse, relative, related persons. We cannot have a 1 year requirement for this piece of legislation and 2 years for the other, because otherwise there would be no predictability in the court's view. And members of the public will find it helpless if they rely on the law on certain issues. So I think that if this step is acceptable by all, I don't think we should push further. I think that you've tried your best. We have agreed on using the term related persons, and if you push further to upgrade the priority to the same level as relatives, then I believe that it will be very controversial. And my judgment is this. You may not believe me, because some members of this council did mention to me that they did not want to accept this additional category of related persons. So it's not just Priscilla Leung who is having this view. My view is subscribed by other members as well. It is a controversial issue. For relative and spouse, these definitions stem from the marriage institution, and these definitions have legal implications. They may be rights, they may be obligations. But without a marriage, the relationship may not have any other obligations and rights derived from it. I think that we should maintain the status quo. I think the government has tried, and we have also tried hard. I think that we should be able to deal with this issue whilst maintaining our views on the marriage. And I have approached some people who are concerned about this issue, and I have engaged them in discussions. And I think that we do have a consensus on the point raised by Mr. Ray Chan. For people living together, the length of living together should be 2 years, and same-sex partners would be included. And for because apart from same-sex partners, for the relationship of domestic helpers and employers staying together for a long time, and also sworn relationships, they can also be included. But I'm afraid we cannot include same-sex partners married outside Hong Kong, because Dr. Fernando CHEUNG mentioned the judgment handed down by the court on the 28th of April, and it's a worrying trend. And it is a controversial judgment with far-reaching implications. There is wide repercussion Now, I haven't even thought about why. Well, yesterday, I received some organizations concerned about family values and women's organizations, and these people are concerned that the heterosexual marriage institution will be challenged, and they made this point about the marriage litigation ordinance. It clearly provides that some forms of marriage are not valid in Hong Kong because they're not acknowledged in Hong Kong. For example, if the spouse is under the age of 16, if the spouse is a close relative. And then there is also another provision: if the spouses concerned are not one male and one female, then the marriage should be declared void. So it's clearly stipulated that same-sex marriage is void. Whereas for partner and spouse, or like the Americans say, then he or she is my significant. The person may be just a cohabitant, but they would regard the other person as boyfriend or girlfriend and somebody significant.
But they don't use the word spouse. Spouse is actually a status in any legally recognized marriage. I have written many opinions and as to whether somebody has the inheritance rights. And first of all, you have to define whether somebody is a spouse. And then the judge in this case says, I recognize this person as a spouse, but I'm not talking about same-sex marriage. And it is said that we don't have to give recognition to a marriage entered overseas. And then it is said that in the IRO, as you know, one party should be a man, the other party should be a woman. So these people should not be able to declare their tax obligations as a spouse. That is why I say this is so confusing. The public see this word spouse and you don't know what it means anymore. I thought if I register for marriage in Hong Kong, I mean a man and a woman entering into a marriage. Is it that this person entering into a same-sex marriage overseas, but it is not recognized in Hong Kong? But then this person can also enjoy welfare in Hong Kong. And if the same person enters into a heterosexual marriage in Hong Kong, then does it mean that his spouse and recognized by Hong Kong laws will also enjoy welfare? Or if that's the case, would it be that this person who has legal status in Hong Kong will not be able to enjoy the welfare? You know, the judge has made many confusing remarks, and you know how it is difficult to implement the judgment. Perhaps we should discuss this more. I have received a view, and in fact, I have always said that we should not tackle this by law. This may not be the most effective way to do it. We should use administrative rules. Say, for example, you can tell people what you want to be done after your death while you are alive. Say, you can write a will and you can include the person who is dearest to you. It may be a same-sex love affair, and you can include that. The administration should think more about promoting delegation or authorization while alive. It is not about just raising this by one rung. And I don't want people to still say that we are discriminating. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung talked about an incident many years ago that somebody was beaten to death, and I don't think this will happen in Hong Kong anymore. There is prejudice on both sides. Those who object to homosexuality will be discriminated against by the other party. And some people who support homosexuality are very vocal today. They may hold senior positions and they may discriminate against their subordinates who have a different view. But I think we can narrow the differences by administrative means. But please do not shake the basic foundation of our marriage institution. Mr. Holden Chow. Chairman, just now there is a fallacy in the views advanced by the opposition party just now, and I'd like to clarify this first. This time around, it is the administration which is proposing an amendment to add the category of related persons. In the amendment, the administration has said very clearly that the related person means a person who had been living with the deceased person in the same household for at least 2 years before the death of the deceased. This will allow people who have a close relationship with the deceased to claim ashes. We must emphasize here that this has no consideration about sexual orientation. Therefore, I first must refute what Long Hair said just now, that there is an element of discrimination. There is none. And I must state clearly that the definition of related person as proposed by the administration has nothing to do with sexual orientation, and it can in fact tackle the problems stated by the opposition party. But at the same time, Mr. Chairman, we must not lose sight of one thing. Related person, this category should not be played up by the opposition party. They can seek to change the definition of related person and then in a way force the administration to recognize same-sex marriage. Mr. Ray Chan, Mr. Fernando CHEUNG and Long Hair have all put forward amendments asking the administration to amend the definition of related persons to include same-sex partners in a marriage entered into outside Hong Kong, or they would like to expand the definition of relative so as to include same-sex partners in a marriage, civil partnership or civil union in any jurisdiction outside Hong Kong. Chairman, I must stress that the first point is that in Hong Kong, the marriage ordinance states that marriage is recognized by the laws of Hong Kong is one entered into by a man and a woman. And the definition of family or relatives, whether we are talking about the traditional or legal definitions, there are clear definitions and are well-based. That should not be changed by a person's subjective views. For a period in the past, social culture has changed, and in society and in the council now, we can see some people are asking for changing the definition of family members or relatives so as to change our view about family values, or even to deal a blow to our marriage institution whereby we are talking about a man and a woman. This causes a lot of worries. Chairman, I'd like to make use of a legal example to talk about how our laws look at family members and relatives. According to the non-contested will administration rules, it is said that if one person dies intestate, people who want to apply to be an administrator, now according to the rules I mentioned, they have to be prioritized. First of all, the surviving spouse, then the children of the deceased, then the parents of the deceased, the siblings of the deceased, or any descendants of the deceased, siblings of the deceased. If there are no surviving family members, then the estate will be given to, first of all, grandparents, uncles or aunties, and the descendants of the deceased, aunties and uncles of the deceased. Why I want to quote this legal definition, I heard members say that they would like to challenge this. But what I want to say is that our existing laws already have definitions on family members and relatives. There is already a system to handle this. I quote this example so that I can tell you that with regard to the administration of intestate estate, you can see the order of administration, and it is done on the basis of connection by blood or marriage. And I also like to emphasize that family members and relatives are also proved by definitions in the law. This is not done on the basis of personal subjective judgment or views. Chairman, whether it is Mr. Ray Chan or Mr. Fernando CHEUNG or long hair, if you look at their amendments, I am of the view that they are making use of this private Columbaria bill and amendments to it in order to steal the opportunity to make same-sex marriage for it to be recognized in Hong Kong, and indirectly to give recognition to same-sex marriages. Now, we must understand, if we allow family members or relatives as defined to expand indefinitely or to be varied, then the rights and responsibilities of relatives and also the operation of our entire legal system would become very complicated. What is more important is that all along our marriage institution and family values will be dealt a very heavy blow indeed, and this causes our worry. Chairman, the administration is proposing to add a category of related person as prescribed claimants, so that cohabitants who have lived together for 2 years will be able to claim ashes. I must say that this will already resolve many issues raised by the opposition camp. In fact, there is no need to do this superfluous thing to the amendments in order to expand the definition of related persons to include same-sex partner in a marriage entered into outside Hong Kong, or to broaden the definition of relative in order to include civil partnership, marriage, or civil union entered into outside Hong Kong. Mr. Chairman, I would also emphasize that I do not agree with what Mr. Ray Chan said a moment ago. He said it doesn't matter, why blow it up? This is only a small variation, and I'm not asking you to give recognition to same-sex marriage right away. This is only a small variation, and there will not be a big impact, so why make it out as something so serious? I beg to differ. If you can look at the recent JR case about civil service benefits for a same-sex partner, once the ruling was made, the entire city was alarmed. We received the views of many people that they are very worried about the ruling, that it may affect the marriage institution in Hong Kong and family values. If Ray Chan is saying that this is just a small change, that there will not be a big impact and people do not have to get so worried. Well, in fact, almost the entire city was alarmed. People are worried that this ruling may deal a blow to family values and the marriage institution in Hong Kong, where we recognize marriages by one man and one woman. So we believe we have to gatekeep this definition of related person. We must defend every inch of the territory. Otherwise, our family institution and also our family values would be lost forever. Chairman, I hope our speeches will allow everyone to understand that we think the amendments proposed by the opposition camp this time around are just exploiting the definition of related persons, but they are seeking to deal a blow to our family values. And as I said, they are actually going through the back door to make us accept same-sex marriages. There will be a far-reaching impact on Hong Kong society, and I sound a word of caution. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ray Chan. Thank you, Chairman. First, I need to respond to Mr. Holden Chow. Mr. Chow is attaching too much value or importance to us or this bill if we are just seeking to give higher priority to related persons and for it to be at a par with relatives. He said that if my proposal is endorsed, then our one man, one woman marriage institution and our family values would be lost forever, that there would be a heavy blow done to these two institutions. I think he is saying too much about this. We are not debating whether we should recognize same-sex marriage.
When I listened to Ms. Priscilla Leung and Mr. Hon CHAN CHIEUNG's speeches in Taiwan, the top judges declared that it was unconstitutional to disallow homosexual marriage, and the legislature was asked to amend the law within 2 years to protect the rights of homosexual people. I sincerely wish him all the best. And now, for the first time in Asia, among all Asian places, the top judges declare that homosexual marriage should be protected. And now, what are we talking about? We are talking about the ashes of a person which are stored in an illegitimate, illegal columbarium. And if you are a relative, you can claim the ashes. The FEHD can exercise discretion in your favor if you are a relative. And now we have also the concept of a related person who can claim the ashes. And if there's no contending claims, competing claims, then the problem is resolved after a year. But why am I saying that this is not a total solution? Because if there's a dispute, just in case there is a dispute, and if the columbarium closes down, and then I can only claim back the ashes of my same-sex partner after a year, that's not the ideal solution. That's not a solution at all. Now the government has introduced this concept of related person. If there's no claimant, or if there's no claimant who belongs to a higher priority category, then the related person is entitled to claim the ashes after a year. But this concept of related person is a wide one. And then we're talking about only the third tier, the third category. As some members have pointed out, you have some distant relatives who rarely saw you once a year. They would still be, legally speaking, come or prevail over someone who you loved. For this debate, we are going to vote on the Secretary's amendments. If the Secretary's proposed CSAs are passed, then our CSAs will have to be withdrawn. Therefore, Pan-Democrats who are in support of my amendments, and even the pro-establishment members, such as those from the FTU, have said that I have got a point in my under my CSAs, but the chances are that my CSAs will not actually be voted on. I thank Ms. Priscilla Leung for being so frank and honest, and that is the pro-establishment members find some of the Secretary's proposed CSAs unacceptable. I've heard from some of them in private. And now Ms. Priscilla Leung has said the same. So I'm not going to name names. For those pro-establishment members who cannot even accept the Dr. Koh's proposed CSA, which is neutral in terms of sexual orientation, whether it's old buddies, a house helper, a domestic helper. You are not going to accept it because it makes it easier for homosexual people. Therefore, no sworn brothers, no old domestic helpers. You don't want to have anything that would make things convenient. How terrible is this kind of mentality? The homophobia is so serious that, that if you provide something that may give a small minority of people some convenience, they will still not going to accept it. They still claim that they would vote against the CSA. I appeal to all of you who oppose to the CSA, don't just vote against it. Just like Mr. Holden Chow, you should not budge even an inch. The introduction of the concept of related person is going to make it convenient for homosexual people. You are not going to accept it. Say so. For this part, I want to talk about Dr. Fernando CHEUNG's CSAs. My CSA doesn't touch on the definition of relatives. I'm just talking about the number of years of cohabitation of same-sex partners. You may disagree. Dr. Priscilla Leung says there should be uniformity. We shouldn't have different requirements. 1 year for this provision, half a year for another. And if we talk about fatal accidents ordinance, for the aggrieved, it stipulates that claim of damages for the bereavement would be handled like this: relatives, children, and another category that comes before the parents, and that is just preceding the date of death. The person who had lived with the deceased for 2 years or more, as if they were man and wife. And this amendment has already tried to bypass this. I understand the government's intention, because it would like to avoid the mention of as if they were man and wife, because that would mean that then you are given another step towards the final objective. it's not desirable for the court and the judges to force certain laws be amended. But the government wouldn't do it. The JR case was won because the government never did anything to comply with the code. The government drafted the code. CMAB drafted the code, which it did not follow. I've urged the government time and again to consult people, to conduct studies, so that we can have some sort of registration system. Let's not argue about whether it's called marriage. We should allow the homosexual people to enter in some sort of relationship that would entail legal protection. I know this is going to be a lengthy process if there was no judgment from the court. Well, you know, our copyright ordinance remain unchanged up 20 years after the reunification. I hope that homosexual marriage won't take another 20 years of discussion. The government didn't do anything, and the court ruled that there is a difference in the treatment, and therefore the government lost the case. If the government was more proactive, and this council is doing something about it, the court wouldn't deliver a judgment like that. Of course, I would support anyone who would submit a JR on homosexual marriage and on the lack of protection of human rights for homosexual couples. And of course, I know Mr. Junius Ho would ask the MPCSC to reinterpret the basic law. Although we are not talking about homosexual marriage here, if the government took the initiative to consult the people, and then a law is passed and you want to change the law by reinterpretation of the basic law, I'm concerned that maybe one day the mainland would have it and we still don't have it. And of course, I support the CSA moved by Dr. Fernando CHEUNG, but that's not sufficient. That's inadequate. Dr. Fernando CHEUNG is saying that if there is a civil union or homosexual marriage entered into outside Hong Kong, they would enjoy certain priority in claiming the ashes. But what if I don't have the money to get married outside Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong I'm not allowed to get married? Those who can afford to do so would do it outside Hong Kong. So are you not therefore discriminating against those without means? So the CSA's proposal can somewhat make up for the deficiency under Dr. Fernando CHEUNG's CSA. But there is no conflict between the government CSA and Dr. Fernando CHEUNG's CSA. So both of them can be passed. But my CSAs will not be voted on because of the technical issues. Well, I find it regrettable, but I will not appeal for the objection of Dr. Koh's CSAs. It doesn't follow that my CSAs will be passed because of the split voting system. And then we'll end up having nothing. We are not able to move even a little bit forward. And I'm asking the government to conduct a study, just a study, to come up with a system for some sort of a relationship to be established. In 2 years' time, Taiwan will have laws to protect homosexual marriage. And now we're still having a debate on whether someone who had been living together for 20 years would enjoy the same status as some distant relatives. Mr. Stephen Ho, I think Dr. Ko is in a very difficult position. Although we are talking about the CSA moved by Mr. Ray Chan and others, but now things have digressed a lot, and we are also talking about homosexual marriage as well. I hope Dr. Ko wouldn't mind because of the implications that would come out of the CSAs. You may disagree with the idea of homosexual marriage. That doesn't matter.
Mr. Ray Chan said that some loyalists don't even support the administration's proposal, which is a bit more relaxed. And then he asked these loyalists to press the button to speak, but without going through a consultation channel, survey, questionnaire. I really have not heard anything that is that can constitute a strong view according to what you said. Well, at least not from the DAB. Perhaps you can see how people vote. And when I talked to Ms. Leung in private, well, she did not say that. I have never seen it or heard anything like that. I do understand that when it comes to voting, if the administration's proposal is passed, amendment is passed, then there is no need to vote on Mr. Ray Chan's amendment. But I still like to talk about my personal stance and my concerns. You mentioned that for related person, it only takes someone who lives with the deceased for 1 year. I think it's already very loose, because nowadays there are bogus marriages. There can be easily bogus cohabitation. I'm not saying that is wrong. I am talking about well, before that person dies. So how do you prove that is cohabitee or is a same-sex partner? In reality, it is very difficult to prove. So I do think that you need to agree with the administration. 2 years, I do think, is already loose enough. The second point, I would like to talk about Dr. Fernando CHEUNG's CSA. He wants to expand the definition of relative by adding the other party in a marriage, civil partnership, or civil union. If the people involved are of the same sex and the marriage was celebrated or contracted outside Hong Kong, I share Ms. Priscilla Leung's view. Does it open the gate for you to fight for same-sex marriage? I do think so. So I can't agree with this point. But it doesn't mean that I discriminate against homosexuality. I do think that most of the members here don't discriminate against homosexuality. It's just that same-sex relationship and is still something that hasn't got consensus, and there may be legal disputes. So at this point of time, I think it is not suitable to deal with it here. I think perhaps, Mr. Ray Chan, you can continue to fight for legalization of same-sex marriage in a bigger picture. And you can deal with other issues Well, I've heard about this. You can clarify. If same-sex marriage is legal, then how do you teach your kids that, well, you don't just have mom and dad, you will have 2 moms or 2 dads? And when you choose your partner, you don't have to choose a man, you may choose a woman. So you may tell us your views to let society understand, to dispel their concern and worries. But the current understanding and what I know in society, well, I won't say that this is inadequate, but there is no consensus. If you want to push something that will cause more controversy, and I do think that well, when it comes to related person who have been living together for 2 years is already loose. Well, I do think that still that is a bit difficult to prove that the 2 people living together will be, say, a de facto husband and wife. They may be abused. I remember someone who said, I don't remember which one was the Blue Book, talking about different types of relatives, saying that, well, if I bear a grudge, I would go and claim that relative's ashes and just hog it for revenge. And I do think that what you propose may give rise to the same problem. I'm not saying that same-sex marriage is wrong. It's just that at this time I don't think we are ready, and I have not found a good solution. We have to keep we have to take into consideration supporters of traditional values. I think it was a youngster, surname Lai. I think he's from Demostosis, and he was taken away during a flag raising ceremony, and he took the case for a judicial review, but the court said to him that you only thought about your constitutional right, but you have neglected the constitutional rights of others. I do understand that people who are in a same-sex relationship, or those who have married overseas, they have to take into account of people who support traditional values. If you push this, there will be conflict. At this point, I do not accept legalizing same-sex marriage. But I know people who are homosexual, and I get along with them really well. So this issue there is no consensus on this issue. I don't want this to drive a wedge between us. There are already many controversies in society. I think, Mr. Chen, you are one of those rational ones. I hope that you won't choose to barge onto the president's, the chairman's table. At least, perhaps we can pause here and think. Miss Priscilla Leung. Well, Madam Chair, Deputy, I would like to make it clear now. Well, those people who are deciding whether to support or not is not Hon Chow. And you don't have to try to find that member, because it will backfire. You may want to convince that person, but that person, you may in this way push him or her further away. So we all just want to get the bill passed without undermining the marriage system that is in place in society now. And some members may change their mind, that member may change his mind, but I don't know, because I have not talked to him or her. There are still a lot of different views. Just now, Mr. Ray Chen talked about the top court in Taiwan. I checked. The court said that there was no protection of same-sex marriage, so within 2 years there should be legislation in the Legislative Yuan. Well, it's because of this piece of news that sent people into panic, thinking that this is just opening a gate for you to ask for same-sex marriage. In my circle of friends, my families who did not talk about politics, or members of the public who did not talk about politics, they have all reacted to this. For Taiwan to proceed with the amendment to marriage, it's not done with societal consensus. Well, you may say that just a few court judges making up their mind without taking into account the views of the people. We will wait and see. Maybe just like in Canada or in the US, when there is a change of leadership, the law may change, and money is spent on judicial review. And in some states in the US, they have got no money as a result. We have the basic law. We have one country, two system. The basic law clearly states in Article 32, talks about freedom of religion. And in the marriage law of the PRC, we find that it stipulates about a marriage between a man and a woman. So under the one country, two system, we maintained a stable marriage system. I remember when it comes to the domestic and domestic violence, and we talk about cohabitation. We talked about amendments to definition of cohabitees. We wanted to protect people who needs to be protected, and there was a consensus that the marriage ordinance or marriage laws will not be changed. I have to speak again. I don't know if the secretary heard the last part of my speech last time. On the 28th of April, there was a court judgment. Well, the specious arguments are those that I'm not happy with. You talk about gender neutral. I don't know why you will have to use the word neutral to describe gender. And I hear that there are toilets that are gender friendly. It seems like, well, for people who don't agree with that, they are gender unfriendly. I know that the secretary will listen intently. That's why I have to speak again for him to hear. For terms like gender neutral, I think it comes with a very weird implication. What does it mean? I have received a lot of views. I have not done the most studies on this, and a lot of people who have done studies have provided me the information. I have studied about a marriage system in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau. Well, foreigners are very specific about this. They won't just call their girlfriend's spouse. And in some places, you are not allowed to celebrate Mother's Day or Father's Day because it would discriminate against people who are gender neutral. In some places, before the child reaches the age of 12, you cannot choose the gender for that child because you need to leave the choice to the child. And just now I heard that the secretary used the word gender neutral, and that's why I feel compelled to speak again. Well, when it comes to gender, there is male, there is female. How come there is gender neutral? Well, for those who have sexual orientation of the same sex, well, maybe it's just that they are not included in the marriage. A friend of mine came from Canada, said that in some places you're not allowed to celebrate Mother's Day or Father's Day. I think it's getting worse. Well, this shows how the court ruling is ridiculous. If the administration doesn't do anything and buries his head in the sand, then I will ask that all the laws, including this one, word spouse. But we've never had a discussion before, because we assume that it will not be in conflict with our marriage ordinance. Never in my dream that would I think that the court would make such a ruling. I hope that the administration will use administrative measures. The relevant bureau, that is the CSB, if they don't do anything, then I will ask you to clearly define spouse in every piece of legislation. I think this would be crazy, because in other jurisdictions you will find that there is a definition of spouse in the marriage ordinance, and it would apply to all other pieces of legislation. It's not for one court to say something, and then for legislation A it means one thing, and then the other one it may mean something different.
And they also enjoy the spouse's benefits. I mean, there would be too much of a fight. You must be aware of the absurdity of the whole thing. I don't think we should decide on such a controversial subject here and now. Even the Mr. Chen Chi-chuen, founder member of the Democratic Party, he wrote a wonderful article about this subject. It's not a question of morality. It is a question of law. So either the administration makes the determination that you're not doing anything. Now I can move a private member's bill, and we can have the definition of a spouse. The judge says that we don't have to consider the marriage ordinance. How can this be justified? Dr. Ko, I'm sure you will have the opportunity to see members of the legal community writing about this. If you bury your head in the sand, then the worker will not stop. I think you have to explain to us what your position is. Dr. Ko talked about the relevant bureau. Considering the relevant policy, this is very vague. This is too ambiguous. I'm saying this to the bureau that there cannot be any ambiguity, because there would be an avalanche of work that would be coming our way. Columbaria is not a controversial subject. It's only that we have to make it consistent, and there may be problems for those who haven't conducted any studies. Have you looked into the order? You just meeting the marriage celebrated overseas, and then they come back and claim the spousal benefits. In Hong Kong, there can be another romance. It can happen to a man, it can happen to a woman. Now, they may have a same-sex spouse overseas, and they can also have a heterosexual relationship in Hong Kong and claim all the benefits. Now, marriage is about heterosexual relationship. If there are special cases, I hope that you would have the discretion for the relevant bureau chiefs to deal with specific situations, like the Director of Social Welfare enjoys discretion. In the Hon Wen-ming case, she could have exercised the discretion without having to go to the judicial review, and the discretion was gone. Now, all these are significant public spending. On the 7th of October 1997, one of the amendments, the British people were very clear. They wouldn't tinker with the marriage ordinance. There must have been extensive discussion before a consensus could be reached. So the administration has to discharge its responsibility. If you lose a court case, it doesn't mean that you have to close the book. Dr. Ko, please do us a favor. Please reflect this to your colleagues. We do pin very high hope on the administration. We're supportive of the administration. Whatever is reasonable will win our support. But what is unsupportable, we will fight against it till the end. It is a matter that cuts across various bureaus. There may be definitions that have to be clarified. The court said that it is harmless, that the workload would be significant. What about the legitimate couples? They don't have any clear protection. They're not sure about the definition of a spouse. I don't think this is the way to go. Administratively, we can be flexible when it comes to compensation and welfare. So I hope that it's inevitable that we would touch on this. Last year, we knew full well that we would touch on these issues, but this year we've got a new case. There is so much comment, and I would have liked the Secretary for Civil Service to be here, and failing that, Mr. Ko, Dr. Ko, you might need to convey the message to him under these circumstances. In the context of this Columbaria bill, we don't find ourselves in support, and we just can't make this compromise on this core issue. I don't think we are in agreement. But if there are some administrative measures, we can certainly narrow the differences. We can discuss this. You raised Taiwan. Many people are getting paranoid. If you look at the examples from Canada, we don't really want to open this floodgate so easily. I'm sure the mainland China is also looking at this as well. Mr. Michael Tin. Madam Deputy, I'm not going to spend 15 minutes on this. Madam Deputy, I rise to speak against the amendment. In particular, Dr. Fernando CHEUNG and Mr. Eddie Chu's. Not them personally, but their definition of relative and related person to add the same-sex couple, same-sex spouse. I signed a petition together with Dr. Priscilla Leung, expressing our views regarding the verdict of the High Court handed down on the 28th of April 2017. That is the marriage celebrated overseas that will be recognized in here under Cap Section 40 of the Marriage Ordinance. Hong Kong recognizes a marriage involving a man and a wife, the man being the husband and the wife being the wife. So the court's ruling would have my respect. I am a law-abiding citizen, Madam Deputy, the good thing about the judiciary system is there will be avenues for people of different opinions to express their views. So I very much hope the administration will launch an appeal to clarify this legal fine point. As we all know, for same-sex marriage, there is a lot of controversy in the community. The marriage institution, whereby it is composed of a man and a woman. This has always been the consensus. I don't think we should take advantage of this context of the private Columbaria bill to deal with such a controversial subject. And I think this is making the passage of the Columbaria bill difficult, and there will be knock-on effect. There are many other ordinances that contain the word spouse, that will be involved. And if we endorse this amendment, the government might give up on any prospect of amendment. I don't think we can be rash about it. That's all I have to say. Thank you all very much. Mr. Hsu Ka-chuen. Madam Deputy, let me respond to Mr. Michael Tin, who just spoke. It is very straightforward. He mentioned a man and a woman in a marriage institution. That's the cornerstone of our marriage institution. He forgot to mention for life. Now, it is a man and a wife, and it is for eternity. Nobody talks about eternity because there is a high divorce rate. It is so high that people feel embarrassed if they talk about marriage being for life. They themselves and people around them may not be able to practice it. And so it's one man, one woman, and they stop talking about for life. I don't blame Mr. Michael Tin for not saying this. I think he is facing up to the changes in community. And I think society is made up of conventions. The marriage convention may change. The convention of spouses may be subject to change. Madam Deputy, now we are basically saying that there are no problems with the private Columbaria, but for the related persons and also the priority of claims, there are some controversies here. I support Dr. Fernando CHEUNG's amendment. Some members said that this amendment, the devil is in the details, because the knock-on effect is simply too significant. If we recognize same-sex couples, then it would amount to a recognition of the same-sex marriage. It is undermining the traditional culture, traditional marriage institution, and the traditional social mores. Lu Xun, the writer, if he was alive, he would have would he respond with this? He said, if we see a short sleeve, we immediately think of the genital, the intercourse, and the children born out of wedlock. I mean, can we make a leap like this? I think this is really a major leap. Now we are saying that the same-sex spouse will be able to claim the ashes of the cohabitees. They are saying that we're undermining the core values of society. Mr. Raymond Chan has already said that we're going too far. We're not talking about the same-sex marriage. We're talking about who can claim the ashes. Now we are. They are living together through thick and thin, in love, we would have matrimonial vows to live life through thick and thin, through till death do they part. We're not saying that they're dying together. It's just that even in death, they still love one another. This is a simple idea that people should be able to understand. Now, how can we make sure that the gay couples would be able to hold their head up high and be able to collect the ashes of the loved one? Madam Deputy, I attended an event not so long ago regarding the gay couple. It was May the 17th. In 1990, May 17th, what happened? The WHO classified or took away homosexuality away from the list of disease. So it is not regarded as a preferred disease anymore since 1997.
No longer something that has to be treated by therapists or doctors. And therefore, on the 17th of May, it was marked as the International Day of No More Homophobia. I attended the event to mark that day at the Eastbourne Road, Causeway Bay. We had the opening ceremony. We gave speeches. Many people were there to listen to us. Some were mainland tourists. They took photos. Not that they want to upload the pictures to their YouTube channel, but that they were there showing some appreciation, saying that you're doing the right thing. Love is supreme. Love transcends national boundary and gender. To love a person is to love a person irrespective of who that other person is. This International Day of No More Homophobia has the support of many people, but not in this council. We have heard many comments to the contrary. And Ms. Priscilla Leung said that there's nothing as gender neutral. Well, I would like to introduce you to Ms. Teacher Sai Sai, who is neither a male nor a female. He's a person of third sex. And I'm told that that Sai Sai was not the only one of this nature. We are talking about gender neutral or gender friendly or the sexual orientation friendly. What is the opposite of that? Is homophobia, the fear of homosexuality. We have many homophobia people here, and they will try to extrapolate and come up with very horrible deductions. How can we deal with this? Not through legislation or compulsory education. Well, the cure to homophobia is to get in touch, to get along with, and to understand. This is the private Columbaria bill. I support the members' CSA. Well, we celebrate Valentine's Day on the 14th of February every year. Well, if we pass the CSAs, we'll be celebrating St. Valentine's Day now. It's about doing the best you can for the one you love. Madam Deputy, I don't want anything to happen to the passage of this bill. But let me stress this again. There's no need to fear homosexuality. If we face up to the world outside, we should let the CSAs pass. So I submit. Does any member who hasn't spoken want to speak? Dr. Fernando CHEUNG? According to some loyalist members, well, Ms. Priscilla Leung is concerned about the Secretary's gender-neutral stance, and according to her, it was not proactive enough, and Hon CHAN did his best to exaggerate the effects of the CSAs moved by pan-Democrats, saying that this would mean the downfall of the institute of marriage involving a man and a woman, and our traditional values will be undermined. But that's too much of an exaggeration. We're talking about how people or relatives can claim back ashes if a private columbarium has a problem and can no longer operate. We're talking about the people who have entered into a civil union or some sort of homosexual marriage relationship to have the priority enjoyed by relatives. And I'm talking about this in general terms, where I'm talking about a cohabitee who had lived with the deceased for 2 years or more, and then the person would enjoy the same status as their relatives, or in the case of some couples, the cohabitation period can be as short as 1 year. But it seems that members here are very imaginative, like Mr. Hon CHAN has informed us through the quoted articles of Mr. Lu Xun. We are just suggesting to accord some status to those couples who had entered into a relationship outside Hong Kong. But this is not acceptable to some members, because that means that we are starting to change the law or our moral code, or to allow the introduction of some elements into the institute of marriage, which would undermine the heterosexual marriage system we have, involving one man and a man and a woman. And then we will be giving recognition to the homosexual couples in some way. As Mr. Hon CHAN has said, nowadays the vow is no longer that the marriage is for life. Society changes all the time, and our laws should change in accordance with the changes in culture and the commonly accepted values and morals. In other countries, they are also seeing such relationships in a different light. The so-called traditional family value they want to uphold involves the concept of family. What is a family? Must it be a husband and a wife and children? What if the family has got only one single parent? So, should anyone be allowed to divorce? Should there be a pledge to enter into marriage for life, and we should not allow divorce? wouldn't this go against the traditional values in the eye of these members? If that's the case, the current marriage system, the current institution of marriage is already problematic. And if the parents are not here to take care of the children and they are cared for by the grandparents, do we regard them as forming a family? On what basis do we say that this is not the family according to our traditional values, something we should not advocate or promote, and or they should be given different treatment? This is at the core of the argument. Ms. Priscilla Leung said that this is not about views or concepts, but about the law. Well, he's a law teacher, so I would like to seek some advice here. According to the latest court judgment, I read out paragraph 66 of the judgment, which says clearly when there is a difference in treatment, the court will have to consider a few things. First, is it on the basis, is the treatment different based on legitimate reasons? If the government says we have to uphold the traditional integrity of family, and then we have to ask the question whether the practice adopted can achieve the objective. And the court has given the answer in no uncertain terms. Second, is the measure taken proportional to the aim? If we want to maintain or protect the integrity of the traditional family, then the denial of benefits to a spouse who would enter into a marriage outside Hong Kong. If we deny that spouse the right to claim the ashes, can it be said that our family values would then be safeguarded? And lastly, we have to look at whether the act itself is in the public interest. I think the judgment is clear about this. Paragraph 37, and I quote, when the different treatment, whether we talk about an act or as a matter of law, if it cannot be proved that the discriminatory treatment is based on sex, political views, creed, gender, color, ethnicity, then there's a problem. Paragraph 37.
When considering the issue of justification, 呢個 justification 嘅意思就係話
justification means that whether the differential treatment is different.
At paragraph 77 and 78, where the reason for unequal treatment strikes at the heart of core values relating to personal or human characteristics, such as race, color, gender, sexual orientation, religion, politics, and social origin. The court will subject the relevant legislation or decision to a particularly severe scrutiny. 個意思即係話，
That is to say, the court will stringently assess the act. We're now going to pass a piece of legislation would it be subject to legal challenge? Before us, there is a judgment saying that if there is any difference in treatment based on the reasons, based on the characteristics, people's background, and so on and so forth, it can be regarded as discriminatory, and the court has said that the court will stringently scrutinize such matters. And I would like to urge Ms. Leung to consider this. If this bill is passed, it can easily be subject to a judicial review. And human rights will be breached, and our constitutional law, the basic law, will not be complied with because of the violation of international human rights treaties. Then this bill will come to nothing. So as legislators, we have a duty to scrutinize the law to see whether we are going to fall into such a trap, and then it can be subject to judicial review. And if something is discriminatory, how can we legislate for such measures?
Of course, we don't want to create any kind of discrimination, and I do believe that the bill aims at regulating properly private Columbaria, and to control the destruction it causes. They cause on our environment. Well, it's very important to have the law to regulate Columbaria, but as you all know that when the bill is passed, there is a chance that some private Columbaria may close down, or in the course of poor management, they may have to give up the business of niche interment. The relatives will have to come to claim the ashes. And this amendment only points out that should this arises, please if there are relatives who have registered overseas of a relationship, or they enjoy legal status overseas, whether it is same-sex marriage or a civil partnership or a civil union, please respect the relationship, because all that person wants to do is to take back the ash of the deceased. And if we are to pass a bill to legislate for recognition of same-sex marriage, then we will be in a very long debate. But you can't deny that what I have just outlined might happen, and there are people who have legal status overseas, and they want to get the ash back, and you don't allow that. Well, let me clarify. It's not the case that the administration said no to that, but it may be a possibility with the amendment of related person. It boils down to one thing. There should not be any difference in treatment. We have a different definition of relative from A to P. A is the spouse of the deceased, and then all the way down to O, as Mr. Leung Kwok-hung said, and then P, those really the spouse of the really distant relatives. They still enjoy a higher priority over someone who has registered overseas, who are in a legal marriage or are in a civil union overseas, someone who has been living with the deceased for decades. It's a same-sex partner. Why would we do that? So my amendment is to rectify this. I don't think this rectification will undermine a marriage. This is just to avoid similar cases like the judicial review on the 28th of April. If we are to legislate, we need to put in place a comprehensive and sound system, and we should consider it comprehensively. No, we're not here to debate whether same-sex marriage is legal or not. We're only here to debate whether to allow someone who are in a legal relationship overseas to get back the ash of their spouse. Mr. Junius Ho, Madam Deputy, we're here to talk about the private Columbaria bill. The real objective is about ash disposal and internment. The administration has already adopted a very inclusive and relaxed approach. They propose to add the term related person. Related person may go to get back the ash of the deceased, and it resolves a lot of difficulties that one may encounter in the real world. I see the amendments of some members when it comes to, say, related persons and relative. The member wants to add marriage, civil partnerships or civil union of same sex that was celebrated or contracted outside Hong Kong. I find that regrettable. The judicial review of 28th of April, case number 258 of 2015, the government lost the case. The current definition of spouse by convention is between a man and a woman, is based on a well-established legal basis. It's a voluntary union of between a man and a woman. It's a legal marriage. There are no other scenarios. But because of this case, the definition of spouse is left open. I feel threatened because Section 40 of the Marriage Ordinance, Cap 181, we're talking about a core value of traditional values in traditional Chinese society, and not a marriage between a man and a woman. But now, in the peripheral, there is a court ruling saying that there are other elements to the term spouse. And because of a common law case, it's been inserted like a Trojan horse. So the traditional core value is being challenged. And now, you want to add more elements to the term relative and to add more elements in related person. You can see that all our defenses are coming down. Well, some members talked about humanitarian reasons, then that their needs should be taken into account. We should not be too harsh. They sound grand, but as I've said, that the Secretary has already proposed to add the term related person. It's not about sexual orientation. It is neutral. It's as someone who's been living with the deceased 2 years before the death of the deceased. And in Schedule 5, well, if you want to add this term, it's legally plausible. Well, if there is an authorization, will or probate, then the person can be a personal representative or an executor. It's not the case that there is a vacuum that would cause hardship to homosexual people. There are many different legal avenues to allow different types of people to carry out the wishes of the deceased. So there is no discrimination whatsoever. So the proposal to add related person is suffices, but someone wants to extrapolate the issue. If you give them an inch, they will take a mile. Some people say that we're not here to talk about legalizing same-sex marriage. Why are you so worried? But I feel threatened because I can see that all my defenses are coming down. There will be a day, and I can see that happening. It may be very quickly. Some people may say, well, since that all these different elements have been added, same-sex marriage recognized overseas have been recognized in Hong Kong, then why do you still insist that under Section 40 of the Marriage Ordinance and still deny same-sex marriage, their legality? And that reminds me of a passage in my secondary school days. It's about an old man and a wolf. There was this mister who was very kind. One day he saw a wolf being hunted down, and the wolf suffered serious injury and asked the old man to ask that mister to save him. And out of kindness, that mister saved the wolf. The wolf asked to hide. So the mister let the wolf hide in the wicker basket that he was carrying. When the hunter came and asked, "Have you seen a wolf?" that mister said, "No, I haven't." The hunter went away to look for the wolf, and as soon as the hunter's back was turned, the mister said, "You can come out now, the hunter's gone." And the mister treated the wolf. And the wolf said, "Thank you very much. Without your help, I'll be dead. But now there is a problem. I'm very hungry. And there is nothing to eat." "Well, since you've saved me, would you let me eat you?" Well, let me add this. It's a wolf of a rare species because, well, you need to save it because it would protect wildlife. And the mister is just another human being. One less doesn't mean anything. So the wolf said, "Well, since you have saved me, why don't you let me eat you and to sustain me?" And the mister said no. And the wolf bare its teeth, showed its claws, and then was chasing the mister round and round the wicker basket. And then a passerby arrived and asked what happened. The mister said, "It's a long story. Please save me. I saved the wolf, and now the wolf wants to eat me." I think the wolf was trying to bite the hand that feeds it. And the wolf said, "Well, you don't know. This mister was cruel to me because he had me hide in this basket and I was nearly suffocating." And then the passerby said, "I don't understand. Can you reenact it for me?" So the passerby asked the wolf to hide in the wicker basket again. And the wolf obliged. As soon as the wolf jumped in, the lid was put on and secured. And the wolf said, and the passerby said, is a beast. You should not be kind to it. So the wolf was disposed of, and the passerby warned the mister not to be kind like this again. Well, we may not be here to talk about legalizing same-sex marriage, but we're talking about if you give a person an inch, he will ask for a mile. If you want to include people who are in a civil partnership, a civil union registered outside Hong Kong, and relatives, then you have to first deal with marriage, the marriage ordinance, whether there is a recognition of same-sex marriage. So you need to deal with this important point first before you deal with the side issues. I absolutely cannot accept that under this bill, we put in a Trojan horse and add elements that are not allowed in Hong Kong under relatives. I so submit in opposition of this amendment. Thank you.
Dr. Kwok-hung. Mr. Chairman, I've heard a lot of comments from members. I feel very offended by some of the words chosen by my fellow members. They use the word beast and so on. I don't think they should be using these kind of negative words for anybody. Chairman, in the administration's amendment, those who are cohabiting for 2 years, doesn't matter what the gender is, would be given the priority, would become the prescribed claimant when it comes to the closure of a columbarium. But that is not sufficient. I don't agree that we should seize this opportunity to talk about same-sex marriage. We keep saying that for those with certain sexual orientation or for the homosexuals, we shouldn't have any discrimination, but we should not find reasons or excuses to not accept the amendments moved by Mr. Pt2, Dr. Fernando CHEUNG, and Mr. Raymond Chen. Today, May 24th, is a special day. The Legislative Yuan in Taiwan announced the result of a court case. The chief judge says that the disallowance of same-sex marriage is inconsistent with the constitution in Taiwan, and it is unconstitutional. So Taiwan will be the first jurisdiction to have legislation to protect same-sex marriage. I'm not saying this to suggest that we should recognize same-sex marriage in Hong Kong straight away. Hong Kong, like other places, used to criminalize homosexuality. I am a medical doctor. I get in touch with so many people, people of different orientation, different sexual orientation. Some gay couples, just because of their different sexual orientation, doesn't mean that they should be subject to direct or indirect discrimination. If we say that same-sex marriage is not allowed in society, it is a crime, and it is undermining the traditional values, this kind of argument can be exploited either way. You can say that colored people should not be discriminated, but we should not give colored people the same rights, although they should not be subject to discrimination. Many years ago, in this tiny colony, Chinese people and dogs were not allowed into certain place. You may pay lip service that they should not be subject to differential treatment, but you are cursing them, you're abusing them verbally, or you're discriminating against them verbally. Medically, those with different sexual orientation are not perverted. It's just that in their growth, they display these kind of tendency. They are actually no different from anybody else. In Hong Kong, we have to recognize the fact that everybody is born equal. I know that those who spoke before me are religious, and they have some religious faith. In the Bible, it is expressly provided that Jesus' teachings are fair. It doesn't matter who we are. So there are some who are speaking in defense of the traditional morals. They are portraying the people of different sexual orientation in a negative way, and I feel very offended by it. Let me extend this a little bit further. Mr. Junis Ho quoted a story by saying that there is the traditional values in the Chinese people. In fact, in the traditional classics, there were records of homosexuals. Now, there was a story that goes back to the spring period, and also in the Han Dynasty, the emperor didn't want to wake up his partner. He had to cut off his sleeve in order not to wake up his sleeping partner. In the Ming Dynasty, there was no prohibition of homosexuality. In RC and PRC, there was discrimination against homosexuals, an idea imported from the West. Now, during the RC and PRC periods, there are some people who are subject to punishment because of homosexuality. So down through the ages, in ancient China, people with different sexual orientation would not be subject to any moral criticism or moral judgment. It is precisely because of this that we don't want to discriminate against people with certain sexual orientation in the context of this bill. This is indirect discrimination. In Hong Kong, we have to respect human rights and equality, and this is flying in the face of these principles. Mr. Raymond Chan suggested Schedule 5, number 9, in relatives, we should add related persons, and it is defined as someone who has been cohabitating with the dead for a year. Honestly, it doesn't involve any benefits to collect the ashes. It would not lead to any succession of any estate or any particular status because of the claiming of the ashes. It is something between two people. They have a close relationship, and one of them just wants to collect the ashes. And this is a moderate, a humble demand, and we're trying to suppress it, and we're trying to use the arguments, the moral arguments, to suppress this kind of arguments. I don't think we should be so vicious and malicious in our choice of words, and nor should we be discriminatory in our perception of them. Heterosexual marriage or heterosexual couples or traditional families will not be undermined just because we recognize the gay couples. Many years ago, in South Africa, the UK, and the US, discrimination was practiced against the black and the colored people. Just because they recognize their legal status doesn't mean that South Africa, the UK, the US have crumbled. Previously, discrimination was practiced against people of different complexion, and now there is discrimination practiced against those of different sexual orientation. And this is basically the same. They are concocting different reasons, or they are using these seemingly traditional, proper traditional values to suppress these people. Now, if we stick to a tradition, all of us should carry a pigtail. The Manchu people kept the long hair, in a pigtail. Women had to have their feet bound. That's going back 300 years ago. If you're patriotic people, then you should you should wear your hair in a pigtail. Otherwise, under the Qing law, you would have your head cut off or executed. All these traditional values are conventions. Some people may say that the majority's behaviors become the norm. The majority of people practice heterosexuality. If you're not heterosexual, if you're homosexual, then you are unorthodox. In overseas jurisdictions, the US, the UK, for instance, they have mostly predominantly white people, and blacks or colored people are not one of them. In the mainland of China, we're all yellow people, we're all Chinese. But if you are of other ethnic minority, then you would be unorthodox. If you cover your head with headgear, then you're not part of the norm. If you're practicing something that is out of the ordinary, then you're not part of the norm. Discrimination against skin complexion, discrimination against gay people, they are the same. Discrimination doesn't involve any sense and reasoning. It is so easy to apply because if you apply this, then you would be able to command well over 90% of the people's recognition. The same can be said about the votes. If you subscribe to traditional values, heterosexuality, then if you do the number crunching, you would be standing to benefit from it. Does it mean that we can ignore these minorities' views? Does it mean that we can treat them as doormat? Does it mean that we can discriminate against them indiscriminately and deprive them of their rights? The amendments moved by members are very clear in their purpose. They would like to move these amendments in order to allow people of different sexual orientation or the marriages that were celebrated properly in overseas jurisdictions and confer upon them the status in the context of this bill. We saw the immigration department's staff and immigration officers' case. The court's ruling is sufficiently clear. When the judge rules that the civil servants same-sex spouse should enjoy the same benefits, it doesn't challenge the traditional marriage institution. When it comes to the benefits of the spouse, it doesn't impose this upon the people of Hong Kong. It may happen if you follow the Taiwan's path. I think we have to make a distinction here. The court handed down the ruling. The same-sex spouse would enjoy the same benefits as if this is a heterosexual spouse. And also when it comes to this private Columbaria bill, the same-sex marriages celebrated in overseas jurisdictions, they should not be discriminated against. They should be treated in the same way.
At
this time and age, we should not continue to find excuses to be so critical of someone who are different from us. Mr. Leung Chi-chuen, well, after 2 years,